started. Yes. Good evening, everyone. So first of all, thank you all so very much for turning out. This is truly amazing during the last week of the semester, and thank you also to the organizers for bringing all of us here together. So what I'd like to do in the next 12 minutes is actually something very similar to what Professor Goel was doing. I want to give you a bit of a taste of a course that I'm teaching here at the Kennedy School on behavioral science for inclusive organizations. So a few years ago, in fact, in the 70s, quite some time ago, in fact, probably before anyone here, other than maybe some of us, were born, some of the major symphony orchestras in this country did something quite strange. They invited musicians to audition behind a curtain. And it turns out that the curtain helped increase the fraction of women on our major symphony orchestras from about 5% in the 70s to now almost 40%. So why do we need a curtain? To hear the quality of the talent that we want to attract, for example, to an orchestra. Take a look at this checkerboard in front of you. In fact, I'd like for you to compare squares A and B for me. And I presume that all of you, in fact, almost everyone in this room, sees squares B as being lighter than square A. Now let me cover the surroundings, and I presume that about now you realize that in fact A and B have the same color. I see some incredulous faces. Some of you are in my class, so you're not looking quite as surprised. But everyone else is probably quite surprised. So I want to go back for a moment to suggest to you two things. So truthfully, I did not do anything to be. Of course, this is an illusion that your mind makes sense of a pattern that it sees. And the pattern that you have in front of you is a checkerboard. I know you're all like one eye, tunnel vision. So yes, you have this pattern in front of you. And logic dictates that a dark square has to be next to a light square. And the second reason I'm going back is to suggest to you that even though you now know that B is another dark square, you are incapable of doing justice to B. Literally, what I have to do is help your biased minds to get this right. I am covering the surroundings, and by covering the pattern that you see, your mind is able to do justice to square B. We're arguing that that's in fact how you see the world. You see patterns in the world. You might not see many female venture capitalists. You might not see many male kindergarten teachers. And so therefore, it is harder for you to do justice to the male kindergarten teacher or to the female venture capitalist. So this is my first insight. It's in fact maybe a non-sight in that sense, in that raising your awareness is not going to be enough. Like raising your awareness that bias exists did not help you do justice to square B. So what we have to do instead is we have to change the world in which we live. We have to change our systems, our environments. In many ways, that is kind of an aspiration that I have for all of us, because many of you probably at some point have been in a hotel room where the room key card did not just serve the purpose of opening and closing doors, but also of turning lights on and off. And a little bit of design, a little bit of technology, a little bit of changing the environment, not awareness, but a little bit of changing environment that makes it easy for us to actually turn our lights off, even those of us who care about the environment, who care about sustainability. A little bit of change can make it easier for us to follow through on our virtuous intentions. So how do we apply this to diversity, to gender equity in particular? So first example comes from a call actually that I got in 2018 from the Nobel Prize Foundation, because they also had learned that, or maybe woken up to the realization that most, as in 95% plus of the Nobel laureates were men, mostly white, mostly from the Western Hemisphere. And so they invited me to come to Stockholm. And of course, I had to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, so most of the things I can't talk about. But this is one thing that I arrived with and that they wrote about afterwards. I arrived with some of our own research that suggests that when we review people in bundles, when we think about more than one person at a time, we're actually much more likely to make both accurate decisions and more diverse decisions. Why is this relevant? because every year I got a form from the Nobel Prize Foundation inviting me to nominate one person for the Nobel Prize in economics, an economist by training. And I suggested to them, change the form. Have people like me nominate more than one person. Because what our research suggests is that both accuracy and diversity is more likely to emerge if we make these bundle decisions, because then we can really compare candidates and calibrate them across each other and don't have to go back to the stereotype. A second example, although before I even talk about it, let me actually explain what the second example is going to show you. A second example comes from a randomized controlled trial that we did in Australia with a large public sector organization. And they wanted to solve an interesting problem. So they called us also and said, look, we have many leadership positions. We invite people to reapply, in particular people who were among our finalists. We have already reviewed them. Unfortunately, they didn't get the job, but we want them to come back because we've already reviewed them and they're finalists. But it turns out that men are about twice as likely to reapply than our female finalists. And we asked a very simple question, namely, who do you invite to reapply? And they said, well, the top 20%. These are our finalists. And our very simple intervention was, well, tell your finalists that they're top 20%. And that's what you see on this slide. On your left, you have the control condition where you see basically that men are much more likely to reapply. That's the blue bar compared to the red bar. And then on your right, you see the two treatments, which actually didn't differ very much, where we informed everyone that they're top 20%. So that helped us close the gender gap in reapplication rates. Finally, I want to give you a third example that addresses what we call performance support bias. And I wrote a New York Times article on it, which I referred to as the thin file problem. In fact, I learned about the thin file problem from a law firm that I worked with, who invited me to come in because they also had realized that the entry level is much more diverse than the top. 16% of the equity partners were non-white or non-male or non-Americans in this case. One of the large firms in New York, global firm. And we did a number of things, but we also realized that the discrepancies start in the very first year. Because what was happening was that first-year associates were picked by these partners who then wanted to work with them. So in fact, what the data showed was that partners replicated themselves, not just in terms of gender, not just in terms of race, not just in terms of nationality, but also, of course, we're in the US here, preferred first-year associates who had gone to the same law school as they had gone to. And that's what we needed to break. And that's what the law firm actually ended up breaking. And that is this first year. How is work allocated? Who gets support to perform? Who is invited into the cool deals? Who gets the cool assignments? Who works with the rainmakers? And what the law firm ended up doing, this is not research, this is just a story. What they ended up doing was to centralize work allocation so that not the different partners just chose randomly or not so randomly people they wanted to work with, but in fact that we had a centralized office that kept track of how the work was allocated. Okay, so my second insight is we have to go beyond awareness, and in fact we have to give people the tools to fix the system. But sadly that also won't be enough. And that's a slide that my students know very well because I use it like every other class. And that is, I hope I have given you at least some glimpse into the reality on your left, and that is a dirty beach. I hope I have raised your awareness that the beach is in fact dirty. And I also hope that I've given you a shovel to actually clean the beach. But you might not be motivated to do so. But even though you are aware and you have the tools, why would you do the work? That's very much related to what we talked about before. So what do? We have to think about how we change people's willingness to act. And I have just two quick examples here for you. Of course, that requires lots of different tools. You have to think about incentives. I am an economist. I do believe in incentives. We have to think about other types of interventions as well. But what I want to focus on here is we have to change the social norms that we uphold, where certain things are just become inconceivable, such as not cleaning the beach. So I thought I'm going to bring us back right here to the Kennedy School, where a few years ago, it's about 18 years now, one of our colleagues, Professor Jenny Mansbridge, realized that of the portraits on our walls of leaders, exactly 0 were of women. And I can attest, and I think we all can attest, those of us who were here at the time, that this wasn't intentional. We did not want to signal to our about 50% women students that they're not made to be leaders. But things like that just creep in. And so we started the portraiture project, and we changed literally the face of the Kennedy School. So here's an example of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, former president of Liberia, also a graduate of the school, and Professor Mansbridge. Let me give you another example of changing norms. And this is now taking us to the UK. The person you have in front of you here is Vince Cable. He was Secretary of Business at the time. And some of you might know that in 2011, the UK decided to set itself a goal of increasing gender diversity on corporate boards. This was in 2013 when Secretary Cable reached out to me and said they had made some progress. In fact, in 2013, we were at 17% women on corporate boards. That's exactly what you see in front of you here, that 17 out of these figures are female, but they had been stalling. So could we use behavioral science to maybe speed up progress? And so here is a concern that is very basic to behavioral science, and I know many of you take courses on behavioral economics here at the school, in that when we remind people of the absence of women, whether that's in parliament or in corporate boards, of the lack of progress, that could turn into self-fulfilling prophecy. Sometimes describing the world turns into prescriptions in our minds of what the world should look like. So one very simple thing that we did is we changed, this is the true cover of the brochure, we changed the cover of the brochure, and we're still showing you kind of 100 icons there. These now are the 100 companies, the FTSE 100 that we were focusing on, but I'm showing you the 94% of companies that were already diverse. Because what I want to communicate to you is the train has left the station. We are moving towards greater diversity, and if you are one of the outcasts that is not diverse yet, you really are an outcast. So this is my last and third insight. To overcome bias, we need to raise your awareness, we need to give you the tool, and we need to motivate the change. I know ATM machines are not as prevalent anymore these days because who needs cash? But it is another way to describe my core takeaway for you here. Raise awareness, give people the tools, and motivate action. If you're interested in any of what I described to you today, there's a number of resources that I have on my slide. This is the Action to Report, Action to Catalyze Tech, that summarizes openly available. All what I'm showing you is openly available. A report that kind of tries to give organizations the guidelines on how to do this. We're particularly interested in gender equity. I was appointed to the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council, so we also, of course, wrote a report. And then finally, again, ending right here at the Kennedy School at the Women in Public Policy program, we built a portal that is accessible to anyone from around the world. We now have about 800,000 users, where we summarize research on how to close gender gaps in politics, in education, in health, and economic participation. And with that, I wish you good luck designing change.